Done. All right, I think we can start. We have Timei and Ozzy here, and Valentine. So, three people gathered. I think we can form a quorum. Good afternoon, everyone. I am very happy, and good morning to those joining from the US, because I know we have a few people joining us from the US today. IK is on HQ webinar. HQ webinar is the other platform where we have the other people joining us from across the world based on the registration on the webinar at valentineohu.com or webinar.valentineohu.com. Today's interactive session and training is very special to me because I have a friend who joined me, a German flight captain, Alexander Greber, who I happen to make an acquaintance of on radio on one of my shows on Smith's Breakfast. And then he listened to the show and I did something random, like it was a spontaneous move that they decided to engage live stream on Instagram using the station's handle. And he joined. And that was the first time he was ever having, joining any Instagram live done on a radio show. I mean, least of all, radio show across the in another continent. So that was his first time joining. That was my first time doing the live on the station's handle, and it was a very interesting meeting because he engaged very well. We had a chat live on radio and on Instagram, and subsequently, we started having more interesting and enlightening conversations. And then he joined this live session I hold every Saturday. He's been a very active participant ever since. And Alex, I must say thank you for all your feedback. They've been very useful to me. And thank you for granting me this opportunity to share your knowledge with everybody who's joined in today. Alexander Greber is a flight captain, like I said earlier, and crew resource management instructor. He's been a flight captain for over 20 years. He's been in the aviation industry and handling crew resource management for that long and more, over 30 years experience in that. Alexander Greber is going to have this session and talk to us or speak with us for the next 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and then answer questions after. This session lasts for 30 minutes. Feel free to ask your questions using the chat tool that's at the bottom of your page. So just click on it and ask questions. Even while he's talking, you don't have to wait for him to finish. If you hear something that you're not sure of, or you hear something that's, strikes a bell, or, reminds you of something that you were not clear about relating to communication of important matters in hierarchical systems. We know we work in these systems every day. It sounds like a big word, but he's going to break it down to the simplest terms. We all have bosses. We all have supervisors. We all have junior staff that report to us and people we report to. So he's going to, get us through the basic details on how that works in the real world. So Alex, I'm going to switch screens and hand over to you to share with us as well. So you can share your screen. So stop now and switch to Alex.
Okay,
over to
first of all, hello to everybody. I'm very pleased to be here and to share the knowledge. Here comes the screen, and now once I start the presentation, yep, there it is. Yeah, Val, you already said it. I'm an experienced medium long-haul captain, 30 plus years as an airline pilot, and of those 25 plus as a captain, and a very passionate instructor for crew resource management. That's basically behavioral skills in the cockpit. We had a very good introduction into more general aspects of communication by Linda 3 weeks ago. And today we want to look at a special aspect, that is, how does communication work in hierarchical systems, as we have, for example, in the military, in aviation, maritime ops, healthcare, hospitals, and if you break it down, in any office, anywhere, industry, everywhere you have bosses and people who are below them. So the question is, if there is an important matter coming up, How do you get the point across when it matters? How do you deal with that? One of the tools we use in aviation since the mid-70s is called crew resource management. Crew resource management deals with using the crews as well as technical aspects as a resource to achieve safe and efficient flight operations, because they discovered that lack of communication in the cockpit, in many cases of the accidents, led to the accident in the first place. So CRM is the application of communicational and behavioral tools, and we teach our crews that on a regular basis. They have recurrent training every year, and that's standard, that's mandatory by all the administrations around the world. We will look at a special aspect, because in aviation it's obvious. Aviation is a very high-risk work environment, where you have to take decisions in a time-critical setting. So you don't have all the time to think about any possible solutions. You can't just pull up to the right side of the road and stay put and think about it. You have to have certain and various tools to manage the problems that can come up. That also applies to other work environments, like, for example, atomic power plants. They've had their fair share in accidents as well. And that's the same thing. They are in a time-critical situation. Maritime ops, military, you name it, health systems. Why is it so important that people communicate well and are taught how to communicate? It's because decisions are made by humans, and humans influence those decisions with their emotions and how they communicate. And that's what we teach them. By the way, if you have questions in the meantime, you just feel free, hit the button and ask, because that might be faster than writing until Val reads them. Looking at communication, what is communication in general? It's a transfer of information from one person to another. And there are various factors which can enhance or hinder effective communication. And today we would like to look at the influence of hierarchy in that setting. And there's a real nice metaphor. You can think about communication as a stone, a big stone. Now, if you roll that stone from one person to the other, if the area is flat, it's very easy. If you have a slope, it gets harder. And if the hierarchical slope becomes steeper and steeper, it gets harder and harder. Until the end, like if you have to climb stairs, you can only take a much lesser amount of information with you up the stairs towards your superior than if the slope would be less steep. The advantages of communication in a hierarchy are usually that you have a clear distribution of power and responsibilities. And in aviation, we also use key phrases so that you transfer an image of an emergency, for example, right away with everybody knowing in the very instant what you're talking about. Fire on board, any other threat are marked with keywords. So if you communicate between cockpit and cabin, for example, the other group immediately knows what you're talking about. The disadvantages, one of the biggest disadvantages in a hierarchy is that the superior can easily block the information flow just through his or her position. Any questions up to that point? Any raising of hands or? Okay. The question is, why do people fail to make the communication in the correct way? Well, many cases And that's a cultural thing, and that's without any notion of disregard, regard, or whatever. Many cases, superiors try to maintain an image, a self-image of being flawless or perfect. And everybody of us knows that nobody is neither flawless nor perfect. On the other hand, the subordinates try to maintain a certain way of respectfulness and obedience, even in times when there is no more room for that and shouldn't be. Okay, somehow, sorry. Yeah. Then why don't they address errors of superiors? And the problem is, if you're absolutely sure that a superior makes a very, very serious mistake, then you'll say something. The problem is, there is a large gray area. You're not absolutely sure or not absolutely sure yet that the situation is getting so bad that maybe you won't get out. The problem is, once you are sure that there's no way out, you've reached the point where there's no way out and it's too late. So the one who tries to communicate from below to above is faced with the problem, what if I'm not right with my perception? What will happen to me later? Will I endanger my career? What will my superior say? Am I too open, too aggressive? And in other cases, superiors assume they're always right and they simply don't listen. And that's a very important aspect, because assuming that somebody wants or has the intention of performing well, then whatever you do, you think your way is right. So if you get an input from somebody else, then if your way is right, the input from the other one basically has to be wrong. That's a very natural tendency. And you have to teach people knowledge about those facts to become open for input which does not align with their personal view. Sorry, I'm missing okay, that's what I was missing. There are various examples that I want to share with you where it's become very obvious. There was a 747, the jumbo jet, approaching Kathmandu, and in front of the airport, there is a very large mountain area. And they were approaching in clouds, and the captain, who was the pilot flying, wanted to use an approach type which is not really approved for that type of approach. The first officer the co-pilot was quite sure that they were not really right. Fortunately, there was a hole in the clouds, and when he looked down, he saw a river. And he knew that river was in front of that mountain range. And that very moment, he knew, if I don't say something now, I'll die. And literally, he said, and that transcript is confirmed, he said to the captain, you can do with me anything you want after landing, but we have to climb now. And the captain followed his request and saved the flight. That shows that if people, especially subordinates, are really sure that something would go completely wrong, they find the strength to talk. Unfortunately, in a 737 accident of British Midland Airways, it wasn't quite like that. They were climbing and they had an engine failure, which in such is no big deal. They assumed it was the right engine which failed. In fact, it was the left one. To explain all the technical points why they were believed that would lead too far here, but they had good reason to believe it was the right engine, and they were unable to read the instruments well at that time because due to the heavy shaking of the aircraft. Once they reduced power and shut down the engine, it was all smooth again, but they shut down the wrong engine. So they sailed down towards the next airport and announced to the passengers, well, the right engine failed and we are now diverting to the next airfield and all under control. And the passengers noticed flames coming out of the left engine. So they talked to the stewardesses. And the stewardesses went towards the cockpit with that information that the left engine was on fire. The left engine which they had left running, believing it was a good one. They opened the cockpit door, saw the two guys being very busy, and they thought, oh, I don't want to disturb them right now. And they went out of the cockpit without saying anything. Unfortunately, once they were established in final approach, they had to add power to maintain the glide slope until landing. And when they added power on the faulty engine, it failed completely. So the right engine had been shut down, which was a good one. The left engine, which had been left running, failed when they needed the power, and they crashed into an airport part, well, the terrain, only 500 meters ahead of the terrain, killing 2/3 of the people. Just because that information, which was available with the passengers, with the stewardesses, did not reach the cockpit because they didn't dare to speak up. You've got similar examples in medicine where they replaced the wrong hip joint, where they amputated the wrong arm, the wrong hand, or whatever. That's really bad for the people who are affected. And there was, in most cases, somebody in the surgery room who had a hint, at least a hint, a feeling of something was wrong, but did not dare to speak up due to the hierarchy within the system. You've got the same thing in the industry, faulty orders, manufacturing errors with the A380 when it first started. It was something very stupid. When they joined it, the holes for the cables to join were not in the right places from the French and the Italian software because they used a different software type, which was different by the 3rd digit. Same thing, fault handling errors in atomic power plants and so on. So you see, it's a very serious matter, and it can affect people's lives, to take their lives. So that's why we're so emphasizing so much to train people right, to get an awareness that listening and talking is so important and should be free of any reprimand. So we're back to that business, and people don't talk because they're afraid of to be reprimanded if they were not right, and others don't listen because they assume they're always right. How can we solve that problem? Well, we can create an awareness that making error is a normal human behavior. And that in aviation has really gained momentum and has saved many flights. Subordinates speaking up do not want to reverse hierarchy, but they can save the day, your life, or that of a loved one. And why shouldn't they do that? And creating a free flow of information allows the superior to make better decisions because he gets a broader image, he or she. So to sum it up, we're all humans. Treating others with respect earns respect and trust, and that trust in turn enables the employees, the subordinates, to feel safe and perform better and to contribute. And good communicative practices are like a freeway to safety and success. And that's it. Thank you very much for the attention.
Well done, Alex. Oh my goodness. Like that example you just gave reminded me of the movie with Denzel Washington. I don't remember the title of that movie. It's on Netflix though, where he had to disobey the direct orders of his superiors and just control the flight to a safe landing. I mean, the chaos, I can't even imagine as a flight captain, the kind of chaos that you face on a daily basis when you fly, when you're in the air. Remember once I asked you, when we were having the conversation, I asked you if you were flying with somebody that doesn't understand English or German, how do you interact with that person? So in such a situation, how would you deal?
Well, there is no such thing that somebody doesn't speak English or German, you know, a minimum level is required. But to give an easy example, we were once in, I think it was Dar es Salaam, on the return flight to Europe. And we had fueled the aircraft, And somehow, you always cross-check your quantities, what you had as an uplift. And when we were ready to start the engines, one of the points in the checklist is you recheck the fuel quantity. And although we had done it right, somehow about 1.5 tons of fuel were missing. So we stuck at that point and said, well, this can't be, we cross-checked fuel arrival against fuel uplift, and the numbers added up, and we said, well, it probably is an indication problem. And the first officer said, Alexander, I really would feel better if we just skip it here at the 1.5 tons. And if we have it too much, we're still safe. We're not over max takeoff weight, but just for the right thing. And so I said, okay, we'll do that. Made an announcement to the passengers, fueled, and name it, when we arrived in Zurich, the 1.5 tons still were missing. So we were right to add those 1.5 tons. I don't know where they disappeared or if there was an error in the fueling in the first place, but to be able to communicate, freely from one end to the other gives you the chance to perform better. And as I said, you can have a metaphor like the superior is like in a castle, and the subordinate is rolling a stone of information up the hill towards the castle. Now, if the gradient is very steep, it's very difficult to roll up information. The steeper the gradient, the less you can roll up. And if you don't open the gates of the castle as the superior, the information still can't enter. So we as superiors have to know that we have to listen, that there can be information which is outside of our mental scope, as we are humans, and the subordinates have to know that we are affected and what their duty is. And if both know that, the system works very well.
That makes perfect sense. That is very clear. We have a few questions here that the first one that came in from Andrea. Andrea, thank you for joining us from the US. Andrea, by the way, was the facilitator last week. She gave a very nice class and interactive training on customer service. And Andrea, after next week, you're up next. You're going to be giving us the second part to that. Andrea says, what made you go into aviation, and what has been your most challenging situation so far when dealing with a passenger or crew member?
Whoa. What made me go into aviation? I can't really remember when it started. I was a young boy looking up into the sky, and my mom had to tell me, Alexander, look straight ahead so you're not stumbling. It was always in my genes, and then through school and training and interest, I just drifted into that, applied for aviation school and passed with flying colors, so something must be right. And yeah, ever since like that. Most challenging situations, oh my goodness, that's a big question. I had a fair share of like near miss incidents where aircraft came very close to ours. And fortunately, the situation was solved in due time. There is very little chance to really avoid it when you see it, because you're traveling so fast. You're traveling with 850 kilometers. The other one is traveling with 850 kilometers an hour. So you have a close-in rate of 1700. From the size of an insect on the screen up to a full-size aircraft heading towards you, it's within seconds. And the aircraft is so slow in reacting that there's almost no chance. So you have to do it beforehand. And other difficult situations if passengers get very, very sick on board. And I had one death on board, which was very strenuous on the cabin crew.
That is scary. I mean, you're living a movie, eh? I'm just imagining. But I can't imagine how challenging that is. But we'll have an idea, because you know what's interesting about what you were saying? I was listening to you talk, and it reminded me of a situation where there was in the news, the federal government of Nigeria planning to improve their instrument landing systems by ordering new ones for the international airports, the one in Abuja and Port Harcourt.
Yeah.
And there was a very interesting situation that happened where the Minister of Aviation and the Customs Ministry were having a go at each other, to determine whether they are to pay some charges, while the aviation industry was suffering because the Cat 1, Cat 3 systems that they imported to replace the Cat 1 and Cat 2 was left at the ports without being cleared. And that would have salvaged a lot of situations because some international airlines couldn't land in Nigeria because they didn't have those, instruments, and they were landing in Ghana and some other places. But that's a story for another day. But I just imagine in situations like that, if the heads of each ministry saw eye to eye and they could communicate and reduce a lot of the barriers to their communication, they would have solve the problem a little easier. Andrea says, what's your favorite destination to fly to and why? And have you had a time where you had a challenging landing?
Oh, challenging landing, yeah, that was Yaoundé in Cameroon, because Yaoundé has very little lighting. And if we get there at night with some thunderstorms, it is a dark place to go. Believe me. Favorite places? Africa. I love the continent. I've got friends in Tanzania since almost 30 years. I love the food, I love the music, and as well, Cameroon Douala was always very nice. And looking forward that we pick up flights to Africa again very soon.
And hopefully we see you in Nigeria pretty soon, eh?
Yes, we have a personal meeting.
Yes, we do. We do. Loretta Oluwusen, thank you for joining, Loretta. She's an engineer, and I'm not going to reveal details more than that, but she's an amazing person and a manager as well. She said this is very apt. Good communication between the superior and the coordinators, or the subordinates rather, between superior and subordinates help the superior to receive feedback that could even prevent major disasters and also bring out the best in the subordinates. But what's your advice to upcoming pilots?
Well, upcoming pilots should be trained in that area. That should be the case. The problem they're facing is some of the captains are still from an older generation and they have a hard time accepting that. So good communicational skills and insisting is vital to survival, or can be vital to survival. And one advice in that point is, for example, if you start discussing about factual things, people think factual things are more important. Not really. But if a co-pilot says, I feel unwell and I'm feeling insecure, the captain can't say, no, I know that you in reality feeling very well and you feel secure. No, if you come in with your emotions, they cannot be denied. So if that is one resort, and there are various steps of escalating the awareness, and finally, I mean, there was an incident with an airline where they ran out of fuel, and the discussion was, the captain insisted on continuing, and what could the co-pilot have done? And there were suggestions like attacking him, or no, it's just you get on the radio and you declare Mayday, 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 low fuel, and then you hang up. And then the other one who didn't want to listen shall explain to the authorities on the ground that that wasn't true. So you can force him in that respect. It depends on the situation, and fortunately, awareness is growing that good communication is vital for that type of work environment where you have not much time.
Awesome. Thank you for answering that. It is a very beautiful answer because it transcends aviation. It goes, affects us. We encounter communication issues and challenges, especially in this part of the world where your boss is almost godlike in your face, and there are certain information that will be vital to, helping the company save money, or, saving the company some disaster. And then the subordinates keep the information to themselves because they are not sure how the boss would react to such. Andrea says, fabulous job, Alex. Lastly, during Corona time, have you seen a huge decrease in staff and passengers?
Did I see a decrease in?
In staff and passengers. I assume it's aviation she's referring to.
Well, I have been personally on the ground now since February. So I've got my next flight on the 15th or 16th of July. I have been to the simulator in between because otherwise I wouldn't be legal anymore. But aviation has almost come to a standstill except cargo operations. Since we do not do that, just passenger operations have been on the ground almost all the time. Yeah.
How do you communicate a potential disaster situation to a boss that you know is somewhat volatile, and when you know that revealing that information could risk your job?
Well, in aviation, the answer is clear. I would prefer, even as a young co-pilot, to risk my job than to risk my life. But you have to be aware of that beforehand. You have to have thought about it. If you're dropped into the situation and you're like, oh my God, what shall I do? You might be overwhelmed by the situation.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Alex, you're an amazing person. I can't even say thank you enough. And unfortunately, every good thing comes to an end. And it seems very short. If it actually felt like 15 minutes. Special thanks to you, Alexander Graeber. I'm going to share my screen now and show you what this guy is about. I mean, who he is. Flight captain and crew resource management instructor for over 20 years. And he's been flying in and around the world. He hasn't been to Nigeria. We hope he gets here soon. And for people who are interested to get materials or from this session, please send me an email, webinar@valentineohu.com, or just send to val@valentineohu.com. Thanks to you, Great Mind. Thanks to you, Timaine. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Loretta Lou. Thank you, IK. Thank you, Ozzy. Alex, are we going to have a second part to this conversation?
Well, most likely, yes. I mean, from my side, anytime. You can. I do seminars, and they can last days. So 30 minutes is not really a long time. It was just a brief look at how to do it. Okay. But yes, with pleasure.
And if anyone, thank you, Andrea. And if anyone wanted to consult you, what's your email address if you'd like to share?
Yeah, it's very easy. It's alexander.graeber, and then first name, last name, dot in between, and then at web.de for Germany, or it's Alexander_aviator in Instagram.
Thank you, Alex. Talk to you soon.
Great job, Alex.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, everybody. And
have a good weekend, everybody. And
you too.
Al, our appointment,
yes,
be it in Lagos or anywhere around the world, is still standing.
All right. Race you to the gates. Cheers, guys.
Okay.
Join me again next Saturday, all right? Next Saturday, we'll have effective communication in the workplace post-COVID, and that will be the conversation for next Saturday, July 11th. Have a great day, guys.